plates. Now, right after this hook, view mounts our component to the DOM, and then it fires this hook right here, the mounted function. Now, this is a popular place to make fetch requests if you need data for your component, but you can also make them in different hooks like the created and before mount hook too. Now, once the component is mounted, we know that data can change either over time or in reaction to user events like clicking buttons. Now, when that happens, when that data updates and changes, it's then that we fire the before update hook. Now, this happens after the data change, but before the updates are re-rendered to the DOM. Now, once they are rendered to the DOM, we fire the updated hook, and that's after all of the updates have been reflected in the browser. Now, finally, when the component is no longer needed on the screen in the browser, it's removed. It's at this point that we fire two final hooks, before unmount and unmounted, which we could use for any component cleanup. So that's the whole life cycle right here. It's a very good diagram, which I would suggest looking at yourselves. So I'll leave the link to this page attached to this lecture. And now what we're going to do is have a little go of some of these different hooks inside our project. So what I'd like to do now is show you how to use these different lifecycle hooks in our components, and we'll just go through a few of them. So let me first of all go to the block component, and remember that's the green block that appears on the screen only after we click the play button. Now, if we want to use a lifecycle hook inside this component, we place it directly inside the component object. So after the props, I'll come down here and just say mounted, for example. Now, if I wanted to run some code when the component has mounted the DOM, I'd place it inside this mounted hook right here, and this will fire only when this is mounted to the DOM, the component. So for example, I could say console.log, and I'll just say components mounted inside there. I'm going to save this and refresh the page and just clear the console. Now when I press play, this component will mount the DOM, and we should see this logged to the console, which we do. Cool. So let's try another one. I'm going to now use the updated hook, and remember this fires when any data inside our component is updated. Now, we don't have any data that is going to update over time inside this component. We only have the
Oh yeah, btw, it's h-1 utbk, and I still feel I don't know anything. So yeah, I'm just learn how to code, I think. Oh my god.
delay that's passed into us, and it doesn't change after it's been passed in. So let's instead create some data for this component, and inside here we need to return the object, and I'm going to create a property called show block, and I'm going to set that equal to false to begin with. Now, the reason I'm creating this is because I'm only going to show this if this is true, because remember, when we click on this to start a new game, we don't want to show it right away. We want to wait for however long this delay is, and then we only want to change this to true to show the block after that delay is up. So that's why I'm doing this. So I'm only going to show this if we have a true value for show block. So by default, when you first load this page,
I don't know. So I think I will use this and use off this and tilting. Oh,
page is going to be false, so it won't show, and then
ini gak enak bro, sumpah bro. Nah gini mungkin oke.
And what we'll do
Ini gak enak ya. Ini aja.
we start a timer for this delay. And we'll change this to true. And we'll do two things in doing that. First of all, we're going to demonstrate this hook updated, because then that will fire when this changes. And secondly, When this is changed to true after the delay, this block will then show, and then in the future the user can click on it after it shows. Does that make sense? So to begin with, if we check this out, if we refresh and click play, then we don't show it now by default because this is false right here. So now let's start a timer inside the mounted hook, because that's when we want to start the timer, right? We want to start the timer for this delay inside mounted when this goes to the screen, this component, and then after that amount of time we want to show this div right here. So let's start the timer inside mounted. So I'll say set timeout to start the timer, and inside here we fire a function after a certain amount of time. Now that certain amount of time is the second argument, and it's going to be this dot delay, so the amount of time in milliseconds that we pass in. Now that could be like 4,000 milliseconds, which is 4 seconds. So this would fire after 4 seconds, or whatever the delay is.
Kayaknya aku nggak kebiasaan deh guys pakai ini. Kalian aja.
Now inside this function, what do we want to do? Well, after that 4 second or delay, whatever it is, we want to change this to true. So I'm going to say this dot show block is then equal to true, and also we'll log out the delay, console.log this dot delay, just so we can see how long, oops, let's do that on a new line, how long we were waiting. So remember, from the start we pass in this delay that we make right here as a prop. We take that in right here. Then
Wait.
so remember, from the start we pass in this delay that we make right here as a prop. We take that in right here. Then when this whole component mounts, we say, okay, we'll start a timeout and fire some code after that amount of time in milliseconds. So after that amount of time, we set show block to be true, and therefore, after that amount of time, this should show on the screen. So let me save it, and I'm going to get rid of that and refresh, press play, and then this still fires. After some time, we should get the other function, which then shows this, and also the delay. Okay, now at this point when this shows, this has been changed to true, so the data has changed, it's been updated, and at that point this will fire. So let's see that. So console.log, and we'll say component updated like so. Save it and get rid of this, refresh, and let's play again. So when the green block shows, we should see component updated at the very same time. So let's try it out. We wait for a few seconds, then it shows, and at that point we also see component updated. So if you want to perform any kind of code at that point to do something or other, you'd put it inside the updated hook. Cool. So now we've done a bit of this functionality and we've seen a couple of hooks. Let's also do one final hook, unmounted. And by the way, we will see other hooks in the future as well. I'm just showing you a handful now. And inside here we'll say console.log unmounted. So remember, this fires after this component has been unmounted from the DOM, so when we no longer see any of it anymore. Not when this doesn't show, but when this whole component doesn't show. So let's save it, and if we refresh, well, the component never actually unmounts at this point in time. Even when the block comes on, it never unmounts. But if I go to the code, and I'm just scooting this over here so we can see the console, if I go to app.view and comment this out and save, we're going to see it over here, because now this should be no longer in the DOM. It's taken out by view, and we should see component unmounted. Save it, and we can see unmounted right here. Awesome. So this function would also fire if we're using view routing in the future to go from page to page, and we're showing different components for each page. If we navigate away from a page, then the component from that page will unmount, and then this will fire there as well. So it's also good for when you're working with the view router, and we will work with the view router later on, so don't worry too much about that for now. But hopefully you've got at least a general idea of the life cycle of a view component now, and these different methods or different hooks that we can use to fire code at different stages during that component lifecycle, and they are really useful as demonstrated right here when we use a set timeout to wait a certain amount of time before we change a property to show the block on the screen. So this is a really useful hook for us at the minute. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get rid of some unnecessary stuff right here which we don't need anymore. I'm going to get rid of that as well, we don't need that. And I'm going to get rid of these two hooks because we don't really need them. I'm going to save it as that, and we'll move on in the next video to actually reacting to this block appearing on the screen.
Introducing the English test designed for you. Convenient, fast.
Okay, so now a user can start a new game by clicking that button. They wait a few seconds before the green square appears on the screen, and as soon as it does, we want the user to click it as soon as they see it. So ultimately, we want to measure their reaction time. But what is that? Well, that's the time between the square first appearing on the screen and them clicking the square. So we need to measure that.
Well, it's not defined insertion.
And to do that, we're going to be creating a timer using set interval, and that's going to count in milliseconds how long it takes for a user to click it from the square first appearing on the screen. So to do this, we'll need to create two different methods inside our block component. One to start a timer when the green square first appears on the screen, and one to stop the timer. So let's do our methods property, and inside here do two different methods. Start timer, and also after that we need another one called stop timer, and we'll stop the timer when a user clicks on the green square. So we want to call this as soon as the green square appears on the screen, and that happens right here after the delay. So at this point I want to start the timer, and to do that I need to say this to reference the component, then the method name, start timer, like so. Now, how are we going to create this timer? Well, first of all, I'm going to create two properties in our data. First, the timer itself, and we're going to set that to null to begin with, and then the reaction time, and this is going to track the amount of time it takes for the user to click on the square. So this right here, this is going to store a set interval. Now that set interval is going to run every 10 milliseconds, and every 10 milliseconds we're going to increase this by 10 milliseconds. So the timer is running in 10 millisecond steps. So let's create that. First of all, we'll say this dot timer is equal to set interval, like so. And the reason, by the way, that I'm storing it inside some kind of data is so that when we come to stop the timer later on, we can clear that interval that we store. All right, so this is going to run a function, and that function is going to run every 10 milliseconds. All right, so this is going to increase by 10 milliseconds a time, and every 10 milliseconds what we want to do is take this dot reaction time and add 10 to it, so plus equals 10. That's all we're doing. So we're timing the reaction time in steps of 10 milliseconds. This is going to keep on increasing until we stop the timer. So then, when we do stop the timer, what we want to do is clear that interval. So we'll say clear interval, and we pass in this dot timer, this thing right here, and that's why we stored it, this dot timer. And when we clear the interval, this function is no longer going to fire. So reaction time is no longer going to increase. So that will be the end reaction timer. Now we want to call this when a user clicks on the green block. So let's do that up here. We'll say at click and set that equal to stop timer. So I hope all this makes sense. When the component first mounts, we wait for the delay time before the green block appears. Then when it does show, we start the timer, and that goes up in increments of 10 milliseconds, and we store that time in reaction time over here. We store the timer, the set interval, inside this variable. Then when a user clicks on the green square, maybe after 50 milliseconds or something like that, then we clear the interval, and so this will no longer keep going up, and it will just store their reaction time, what it was at the point of clicking. So we clear it, and we also should maybe log out their score to the console for now. Console.log, and we'll say this.reaction time. So let's try this out. I'm going to refresh over here, clear that and play, and wait for the green blob to appear. Click it, and we can see my reaction time was 360 milliseconds. Let me try that again just so you can see it's different. And now I get 480 milliseconds. All right. So now we're tracking their reaction time. The next thing we need to do is figure out how to tell the parent component over here that we have that reaction time, they've clicked it, and how to send that data, that reaction time, back up into the parent component, because we're going to work with it inside this component, and we'll see how to do that in the next lesson. Alright then, so everything's working so far. We can click on play to start a new game, wait a few seconds, the green block appears, it starts a timer, we click on the green block and then it stops the timer, and then we get our reaction time right here. But we want to do something with that reaction time. Ultimately, we want to show it to the user, and we're going to do that around about here, and it will be shown to the user eventually inside this results component. Now that results component is going to be nested inside app.view, the root component below the block. Now if we're going to show the results in the results component, then we need that data, the reaction time, that's stored inside the block component. So how do we get it from the block component back up into app.view in order to pass it down into the results component? Well, we can do this by emitting a custom event from the block component. Remember, we've seen this in the past. We emit a custom event from a component by using the emit keyword, and we're going to do exactly the same thing here. So right when we stop the timer, this is after we've clicked the block. That's the moment I want to emit a custom event to this thing right here, so we can react to it inside the app.view. And when we send a custom event or emit a custom event, we can send along with it some extra data. So I could send along with it the reaction time, and then we could access that from app.view. And that's what we're going to do. So let's do it right here when we stop the timer. That's when we want to emit the event. So we'll say this dot $emit. We've seen this before. We give the event a name. I'm going to call it end because it's the end of the game once they've clicked on it. And you can call it what you want, by the way. That's not important. But the second argument is going to be any data we want to send along with this event. And that data is going to be this.reaction time. So their score that we have right here, the 380 milliseconds in my case. So let's now save that. And remember, we can react to this event being emitted inside the parent component on that component right here. And we do that by saying at and then the event name, which is end in our case, and setting it equal to some kind of function we want to run when this event occurs. So I'm going to call this function end game because that's what's happening, right? And we need to create this function now down here inside the methods. So end game like so. Now remember, we passed along this second argument, this data, and when we do that, we automatically add the methods. This event occurs. So I'm going to call this function end game because that's what's happening, right? And we need to create this function now down here inside the methods. So end game like so. Now remember, we passed along this second argument, this data, and when we do that, we automatically get access to it as a parameter inside the function that we use to handle that event. So let's do that. I'm going to call this reaction
What the hell?
time, but you can call it what
Okay.
you want. It doesn't have to be the same as this. We're just passing a value here, and it can be called whatever you want inside this function. So we have that inside this function, and what I want to do now is store that time or that score inside this component in a variable or in a property. So let's create one called score and set that as null to begin with, and then we'll update this right here. So we'll say this dot score is equal to the reaction time. Okay, so that's all I want to do for now. In fact, I also want to say we're no longer playing the game. So I want to turn that back from true to false again, because we've ended the game, and then that way they can start a new game if they wish. So let's say this dot is playing is back to false. Okay, so now we have that, and we have the score stored right here. We could therefore output the score over here. So let's do that. We'll do a p tag for now. Eventually.
Oh, dia ngepas apa? Argumen nggak sih? Ya, argumen masukin ke eventnya, masukin ke endgame jadi punya reaction time ini, reaction time diambil dari sini. Melompat-lompat gitu ya guys ya.
We are going to show them inside the results component, which will be nested here. But before we do that, let's just output them in this component. So paragraph tag, and we'll say reaction time, and that's going to be the score, because we store it here, right here. Okay, so let's add milliseconds after that, so we're using those, and save it. I'm going to come over here, and we can see it. The minute, there's no number there, but when we play, once we click on the green blob, when it appears, we can see now reaction time is 520 milliseconds. So we're taking that data from the block component, we're passing it up inside this custom event, and then we listen to that event right here. We call this function, which automatically takes that argument, and we're updating the score, which is equal to that time, and then we output the score over here. Now, when we first load the game like this, I don't want to show it. I only want to show it based on a certain condition. So let's now go over here and say we'll have another data property called show results. And there's more than one way of doing this. I just want to make it explicit. And I'm going to set that to be false. And then I'm going to say up here, v-if, and set that equal to show results, like so. So now only if this is true will this show. Now how do we set this to true when we want to show it? Well, we can do that at the end of a game. So I can say this dot show results is now equal to true. So save that and then come over here and refresh, and now it doesn't show to begin with, but it should show at the end once we've clicked on this green square right here. The only thing is, if we start a new game now, then it still shows, and I want to hide it when we start a new game. So we'll say over here, this dot show results is then equal to false again. Save it, and let's come over here, play the game, wait a second or two, click on that, we see the results. As soon as we start to play again, we don't see that time until we click on the green square again, and then we see it. So that is much better. Okay, so that's how we use custom events to send up data as an argument, which we can then receive in any kind of callback function we use.
If this is to be the end.
Alright then, so it's time for another challenge, and this time it's a relatively simple one. All I want you to do is, when the game ends, show the results component. So that's this thing over here. So you can show that underneath the block and only show it after the game ends, much like we only show the reaction time score after the game ends. So you can delete this and you can show the results instead, then inside that results component output the score. So that's all I want you to do. Now pause it right here, give it a go, and if you're struggling you can press play again, because now I'm going to show you my solution. Alright, so the first
Kenapa nggak ada itu ya? Tekan skornya ini kan. Ini caranya ngambil ini masukin ke sini. Dia kan pakai yang namanya ini nggak sih? Oke, ini skor. Skornya pakai skor. Terus kita buat name aja. Yang makin bisa dipakai di sini. Ini ke sini. Done.
first thing important here,
Tapi ya belum gue ikut ya, udah.
and then inside the results, remember binding to me, just to call it the same thing. So now we're passing that prop, so I'll say prop action rated organize. If they get something on, I'm going to do a data property first of all, and that is going to return the object we need, which will have a property rank, and it's going to be null to begin with. Now we need to also update that rank based on the score, and I'm going to do this inside the mounted hook. And remember, this fires as soon as the component is mounted to the DOM, and that's when we want to update the rank so we can show it. So I'm going to now check the score, so I'll say if, and then this dot score, which we have access to because of the prop, and if that is less than 250 milliseconds, then we'll give them a good rank. So I'll say this dot rank is equal to ninja fingers. All right, now we'll do an else and say if this dot score is less than 400, then we'll say this dot rank is equal to rapid reflexes, and then we'll do an else clause at the end and say this dot rank is equal to snail pace. Alright, so when this mounts to the DOM, we look at the score, and if it's really quick, if it's less than 250 milliseconds, they get a good rank, and we update that property. If it's not less than 250 milliseconds, but it is still less than 400, they get this rank, and if it was slower than 400 milliseconds, then they get this rank. Now we also want to output that up here, so let me do that. I'm going to say P and give this a class actually, equal to rank, so I can style it, and we'll just output the rank like so. Okay, so now let me also just add a few styles at the bottom, which I'm going to paste in like so. So we're targeting the rank right here, and we say the font size is 1.4 ems to make it bigger, a colour of that green, the same as the box, and font weight of bold. Now, while I'm styling, I also just want to add a few styles to the button on the home page, or rather inside the app component. And that's this button right here to start a new game. So let me also paste in a few styles for that, and the very simple styles, the app component. And that's this button right here to start a new game. While I'm styling, I also just want to add a few styles to the button on the home page, or rather inside the app component. And that's this button right here to start a new game. So let me also paste in a few styles for that, and the very simple styles, we're just saying that the button
Pusing lah apa aku.
should have a green background, text white, no border, bit of padding, border
Bro, terus ini bro. Wait, no. What happened?
the radius to soften up the corners. The font size is 16, bit of letter spacing. Cursor is pointer, which is that little hand, and the margin is 10 pixels. And when it's disabled, we're going to give it a opacity of 0.2, so it's faded out, and the cursor is not allowed. So we'll see that in a second. Alright, so let's...
Sip. Nice. And ya, mungkin ini aja yang bisa aku pelajarin hari ini. Besok, bukan besok sih. Masih besok ya.
So what is ClickUp? ClickUp is an all-in-one productivity software.
Satu sama masih ya. Satu sama. Apakah penalti teman-teman? Wih, dari Jerome sih ini harusnya Indonesia.